Imagine knowing almost exactly where a missing Marine died. You know the date, you know his unit, you know approximately where that unit was fighting, and you know he entered a Japanese cave and never came back out. Now imagine having two cases like that on the same island. And remarkably, they're not the only missing Marines whose stories lead into the caves beneath Iwo Jima. Marine combat cameraman Bill Janouse disappeared at another Japanese cave just days earlier. But the cases of Joseph Newman and Raymond Peterson are unusually specific. In both cases, witnesses knew where the Marines had gone, and both caves were later sealed. On March 11, 1945, Corporal Joseph Newman was killed as he entered a Japanese cave. His fellow Marines could not recover him because Japanese soldiers still occupied the position. The cave was later blown closed. 3 days later, Private First Class Raymond Peterson entered another cave while searching for Japanese documents. A Marine waiting outside heard a gunshot. When help arrived, they found blood at the entrance and a blood trail leading down a stairway into the cave. Japanese troops were still inside. Peterson could not be recovered, and that cave was also demolished. More than 80 years later, both Marines remain missing. But unlike many MIA cases, we may have enough information to work backward from the battlefield records and narrow down where these caves once stood. Maybe enough to find them. Welcome to MIA Cold Case. In part one of the series, we investigated Hill 362A and JPAC Site 03, a buried tunnel investigated in 2007 during the search for Marine combat cameraman Bill Janouse. But before we look at Neumann and Peterson, there's something important to understand about the Americans still missing from Iwo Jima. Not all these cases are the same. Almost 100 American servicemen from the Battle of Iwo Jima remain unaccounted for, but that number represents several very different types of losses. Some men simply disappeared during chaotic combat. They moved forward with their units and were never seen again. Others were seen killed, but intense enemy fire made recovery impossible. Some were buried during the battle, only for the location of the grave to later be lost. Others may have been recovered after the war but could not be identified, and some were lost offshore, in aircraft or in other circumstances where the probable recovery area is enormous. There's an important difference between a Marine who disappeared somewhere along a moving front line and a Marine who was specifically seen entering a cave and never coming out. Neumann and Peterson fall into that second category. We have unusually detailed information about what happened to both of them. The mystery is not so much how they disappeared. The mystery is finding the exact caves where it happened. Why that difference matters. For an MIA investigation, there is a tremendous difference between saying a Marine disappeared somewhere in this combat sector and saying a Marine entered a cave in this combat sector on this particular day and never came out. The second type of case gives investigators something to work backward from. Which company was he assigned to? Where was that company positioned on that date? Which direction was it advancing? Where was the front line? Where were the known Japanese defensive positions? Which ravines, cliffs, and rock formations in that area contained caves? And perhaps most importantly, which caves were reported demolished by Marines during or immediately after the action? That does not automatically produce an exact location. Battlefield reports were imperfect. Units moved. Maps were not always precise, and the surface of Iwo Jima has changed considerably. But instead of searching an entire island, investigators can begin narrowing the search to a particular regiment's battlefield on a particular day. That is what I want to illustrate with these maps in this video. I'm not going to pretend we know the exact cave's location. What we may be able to do is establish realistic search areas based on where these Marines and their units actually were. The first case is Corporal Joseph John Newman, a Marine from Buffalo, New York, serving with Company B, 21st Marine Regiment, 3rd Marine Division. On March 11, 1945, Newman entered a Japanese cave. According to the Defense POW MIA accounting agency, he was killed by Japanese forces as he went inside. His body could not be recovered because Japanese soldiers still occupied the cave. American forces later blew the cave entrance closed. Newman's remains have never been recovered. That's an extraordinary amount of information for an unresolved World War II MIA case. We're not wondering whether Newman was killed. We're not wondering whether he was evacuated, captured, or lost somewhere offshore. He died in a Japanese cave. The question is simply, which cave? Putting Newman on the map. This is where wartime unit records become important. By March 11th, the fighting on Iwo Jima had entered its final phase. The 3rd Marine Division had pushed into the northern and northeastern portions of the island, where the remaining Japanese defenders continued fighting from caves, pillboxes, and underground positions. The 21st Marines had been involved in extremely difficult fighting through this broken terrain. I want to be careful with this map. I'm not claiming that this identifies Neuman's cave. What I am showing is the approximate operating area of his regiment, and if the records allow us to narrow it further, his company on March 11, 1945. From there, investigators could begin comparing battalion journals, company records, after-action reports, demolition reports, and wartime aerial photographs. If those records describe particular cave positions being attacked or sealed that day, the potential search area could become much smaller. Then we can compare these locations with the terrain as it exists today. Are there unnatural collapses, filled entrances, ventilation openings, cave systems that do not appear on post-war maps? Are there locations where Marines specifically reported using demolitions? Somewhere in that battlefield, there was a cave containing Corporal Joseph Newman. Unless his remains were later removed without being identified, there's a real possibility that they are still there. The second case may be even more compelling. Private First Class Raymond S. Peterson from Minnesota served with Headquarters and Services Company, 26th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division. On March 14, 1945, Peterson and another Marine were searching Japanese caves for intelligence material and documents. Peterson entered one of the caves while the other Marine remained near the entrance. For a time, they continued talking to each other. Then a shot was heard from inside the cave. The Marine outside called for help, and what they found left little doubt about what had happened. There was a pool of blood near the entrance and a blood trail leading down a stairway into the cave. Japanese troops inside had apparently fired at Peterson at extremely close range. The Japanese still occupied the cave, making recovery too dangerous. American forces later demolished the entrance. Peterson was never recovered. More than 80 years later, he remains unaccounted for. Putting Peterson on the map. The 26th Marines belonged to the 5th Marine Division, which had spent much of the battle fighting through extremely difficult terrain on the western and northern portions of Iwo Jima. Earlier in the campaign, the regiment fought around areas including Hill 362A, Nishi Ridge, and Hill 362B before continuing north against the shrinking Japanese defensive perimeter. By March 14th, organized Japanese resistance had been compressed into increasingly isolated positions near the northern end of the island. Again, I'm not going to put an X on this map and claim that we have found Peterson's cave, but we may be able to identify the probable sector where Peterson and other members of the 26th Marines were operating that day. From there, several questions become important. What caves were known in that area? Do surviving American or Japanese diagrams show underground positions with stairways? Were any cave entrances specifically reported destroyed on March 14th? Were Japanese remains later recovered from these locations? Did post-war recovery teams reopen any of those caves? And are there cave systems in that area that have never been fully explored? Those are the questions that can still be investigated. What else can be inside? There's another detail in the Peterson case that deserves attention. Peterson and the other Marine were not randomly exploring caves. They were specifically searching for Japanese intelligence material and documents. That reminds us that the cave systems of Iwo Jima were much more than hiding places. Some contained command posts, communication positions, medical areas, weapons, ammunition, personal belongings, and paperwork. If some of those caves were sealed during the fighting and never completely reopened, they could contain far more than human remains. There could be equipment that identifies the Japanese unit occupying the position, maps, notebooks, personal seals, weapons, documents, or other evidence that helps reconstruct exactly what happened there. That's the larger point of this two-part series. The goal should not be to randomly reopen every cave on Iwo Jima. It should be to identify the missing person cases where the historical evidence points toward a specific location and investigate those locations first. But there is one difficult possibility we have to consider. Occupied caves on Iwo Jima were often attacked with flame, explosives, or both. We do not know whether flame was used in these three specific caves. But Japanese troops were still inside when at least some of the entrances were sealed. Even intense fire did not necessarily destroy everything inside a cave. Burned or fragmented remains may still survive. And today, even badly damaged remains may still be identifiable. Unrecovered does not necessarily mean unrecoverable. What should happen next? I think the next step should be systematic. A case like Peterson's should receive serious attention. His date is known, his unit is known, witnesses were at the cave entrance, there was physical evidence at the scene, and even a description of the cave's interior. The Neumann case deserves the same treatment. Take the battlefield records and unit journals, overlay the known unit positions on wartime aerial photographs, compare them with modern satellite imagery and current terrain, work directly with the Japanese government and Japanese remains recovery organizations, use modern geophysical equipment where appropriate, investigated collapsed entrances and suspected tunnel systems. And when the historical evidence and physical evidence point to the same place, dig. Almost 100 Americans from the Battle of Iwo Jima remain unaccounted for. Some may never be recoverable. The evidence is simply too limited. Some were lost under circumstances where the search area is enormous, but others are different. We know their units, we know the dates, we know approximately where they were, and in a few remarkable cases, we know they entered Japanese caves and never came back out. Joseph Newman, Raymond Peterson, Bill Janoust. Their story should not end with a notation in an old casualty file saying that the body was not recovered. The hardest question may not be, can we find them? It may be, are we willing to go look? Because somewhere beneath Iwo Jima are sealed caves with the answer. If you enjoyed this investigation, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the MIA Cold Case channel. It costs nothing, but it does help the channel grow and supports the research involved with bringing these cases back into the light. Thank you for watching.